Good afternoon. My name is Robbert Dijkgraaf. I'm the director, Leon Levy Professor here at the Institute for Advanced Study, and it's a great pleasure to welcome you here at this gathering to remember and to celebrate Patricia Crone, a beloved professor in the School of Historical Studies here at the Institute since 1997, and also a beloved member of the Institute community. Her pioneering and innovative approach to the history of Islam brought about lasting changes in the field, and she was greatly admired for her daring, originality, and intellectual power, and we'll hear more about this. But I hope also we hear more about her exceptional qualities as a human being, and the many kind of recollections we all have of her, and that we are sharing with each other this afternoon. It's heartwarming to see this gathering of the Institute community, as well as many family, friends, and who joined us here for this occasion. And I would particularly like to welcome Patricia's sister, Diana Frank, and her husband, Jeff, and her nephew, Thomas Frank, at this occasion. Patricia shed important new light on the critical importance of the Near East in historical studies, in particular on the cultural, religious, and intellectual history of Islam. Her influence is strongly felt at the Institute, where, along with Oleg Robbert, Patricia helped to establish the Institute as a recognized center for the study of Islamic culture and history. Her work reversed conventional wisdom in a number of significant ways. She was always deeply creative, exhaustively sharp, unusually talented, and had a quick and lucid sense of humor. And I think very important that we will not lose our sense of humor this afternoon. An article published in the Atlantic Monthly in 1999, What is the Quran?, described the sensitive business, quote unquote, of proposing theories about the Quran and Islamic history and striving to reinterpret Islam for the modern world. And Patricia is quoted in that article as saying, "The Quran is a scripture with a history like any other, except that we don't know this history and tend to provoke howls of protest when we study it. Nobody would mind the howls if they came from Westerners. But Westerners feel differential when the howls come from other people. Who are you to tamper with their legacy? But we Islamicists are not trying to destroy anyone's faith." Patricia was born in Denmark in March 28, 1945, as part of an exceptional family. She studied at the University of Copenhagen before moving to the Anglo-Saxon world, where she basically stayed. She completed both her undergraduate studies in 1969 and PhD in 1974 at the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London. She had several positions: a senior research fellow at the University of London's Warburg Institute, university lecturer in Islamic history and fellow of Jesus College at the University of Oxford, as an assistant university lecturer in Islamic studies and fellow of Gonville and Caius College, and as university lecturer and university reader at the University of Cambridge, before being appointed to the faculty of the Institute. Her first book, Hagorism, The Making of the Islamic World, was published by Cambridge University Press in 1977 and was written with her lifelong collaborator and friend, Michael Cook. I'm very happy you are here, Michael, and speak this afternoon. And had a profound impact on the study of the early centuries of Islam, probably more than any other contribution to the field. The book received mixed reviews at the time, harsh criticism as well as praise, but eventually led to a much more refined and sophisticated approach in modern scholarship to the study of early Islamic history. Today is considered as a milestone in the scholarly investigation of the formative period of Islam. In her subsequent books, Patricia explored tribes and tribal culture in early Islam and investigated Roman, provincial, and Islamic law and their connections to the Near Eastern legal system. She also challenged the widely accepted understanding of Mecca as a major trade center and presented a powerful perspective on the beginnings of Islam. She was then moved to provide a clear account of the motivations, differences, and impact of industrialization on diverse cultures and societies, ranging from the Far East to the Indian subcontinent to the Islamic societies of the Near East and North Africa. And in another volume, Patricia delivered a broad survey of Islamic political thought in the 6 centuries from the rise of Islam to the Mongol invasions. Her most recent book, The Nativist Prophets of Early Islamic Iran, published by Cambridge University Press in 2012, explored the Iranian response to the Muslim incursions on Iranian countryside, the revolts subsequently triggered there, and the religious communities that these revolts revealed. Peter Brown, I'm very happy to see you here, Peter, in the New York Review of Books noted that she had, quote, given a voice to a hitherto silent land. The highly influential book was recognized with 4 major awards, including the Albert Hourani Book Award, who recognizes outstanding publishing in Middle East studies, the Houssam Pushariyati Iranian Studies Book Award for outstanding publishing in Iranian studies, the Central Eurasian Studies Society Book Award for important contributions to Central European Eurasian Studies, and the James Henry Breasted Prize, awarded by the American Historical Society for the best book published in English in any field of history prior to the year 1000. A festschrift published by Brill in 2014 beautifully captures Patricia's strength of character and her deep and broad impact on Islamic and Iranian studies. Despite her ailing health, Patricia joined many of her colleagues and friends at the colloquium, many of you were present there, in her honor that was hosted by the Institute in February, and she continued her work on several publications that are forthcoming. In 2014, Patricia noted how nice it was to end her last year as an active member of the faculty with a year full of honors. Among these were 4 prizes awarded to her book, The Nativist Prophets. The Giorgio Levi della Vida Medal for Excellence in Islamic Studies, a very important award. The Middle East Medievalist Lifetime Achievement Award. Honorary doctorates of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and for me particularly meaningful, from the University of Leiden, who celebrated their 400 years continued study of the Arabic world with honorary degrees for both Patricia and Michael. And it was a great honor. And she also obtained an honorary membership of a former college in Cambridge. The documentary For the Life of Me Between Science and the Law, created by her sister Diana. And I very much remember sitting here with Patricia watching that documentary. Depicted her diagnosis of cancer and follows her quest to research and employ marijuana's potential cancer-fighting properties and to contextualize its long-standing legal prohibition. Even near the end of her life, Patricia retained a youthful exuberance, seemed to be a special quality of the Crone family. A true iconoclast, Patricia is greatly missed here at the Institute, where she leaves an indelible and powerful legacy. In honor of the great care and affection she had for her field and future of scholars in Near Eastern studies, a Patricia Crone membership has been established with the proceeds from her estate. Close my remarks with the observation that Patricia was a marvel of high spirits and determination. We were all warmed by her intellectual honesty, her unflinching integrity, infectious humor, boundless generosity, and total lack of pretension. But I think above all, she was absolutely fearless, both in her professional and in her personal life. And in that sense, a true inspiration for all of us. I think actually in many ways, Patricia exemplified everything the Institute stands for, and I would say the academy at large, and that's a lot to say. So I think we feel particularly honored that today we have a series of remembrances. And in order to contain the choreography, I will not introduce the speakers. They will say a few words about themselves. I think you all have a program. You can see the sequence of speakers, and then I will come back to you at the very end. We will have a reception, not as the program says in Fuld Hall, but actually will be in the dining hall. And I hope you all kind of enjoy sharing your fond remembrances of Patricia with us this afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Robbert. My name is Nicola di Cosmo. I'm a professor in the School of Historical Studies, and I speak here today as Patricia's colleague, and also on behalf of the school as a whole. I will speak in particular about the presence of Patricia in the School of Historical Studies. We've been colleagues for 11 years, from 2003 to 2014. She chaired the search that brought me to the Institute, and I chaired the search for her successor in the school, Professor Sabine Schmidtke. So here is a kind of bond that bookended a professional and personal relationship marked above all by friendship and respect. During her tenure at the Institute, Patricia, together with the late Oleg Robbert, showed the vitality and significance of scholarship on the Middle East and Islam within the larger significance of understanding the human past. With Islamic studies, our school, for the first time, fully embraced a civilization that could not be defined in some fashion as European. It did so by appointing Oleg Robbert in Islamic art and Patricia Crone in Islamic history, a powerful legacy that continues today, as I mentioned, with Sabine Schmidtke. Moreover, Patricia was a woman, the first in a long time to be appointed in our school, and the only one until Caroline Bynum joined the school as professor of medieval history. Her being a female professor in our school transmitted, as you can see from some of the printed remembrances, a much appreciated sense of welcome to the women scholars who come to our school as members every year. She never made a big deal of it, it's fair to say, but her example was there, whether she intended it or not. Her biography and her scholarship did not require much additional commentary. Among the many qualities that characterize Patricia's presence in the school, intellectual courage, generosity, and integrity stand out. She always believed that knowledge should be allowed to flow freely, and that appreciation of talent should not stop at the doorstep of one's own discipline. Patricia was unflinching in her criticism of people she regarded as mediocre in her own field, while open and generous in the recognition of brilliance in other fields. Such open-mindedness was infectious. The seminar she ran for many years on global empires was open to everyone, from our school, from the School of Social Science, from Princeton University. It was a forum where ideas were exchanged without preconceptions. At the same time, she was deeply immersed in texts. Arabic and Persian texts would be discussed in small groups with those who had the knowledge to read them. This pendulum movement between the flow of ideas and the close reading of sources defines the space that most historians inhabit. But no one more than Patricia seemed able to show how that movement could be perfectly balanced. Patricia's way of being a historian was, simply put, exemplary. She was also very generous with younger scholars. She routinely hired research assistants using her own research funds. I once asked her what they assisted her with, and she said she did not need any assistance. She was just trying to help them in the same way that others had helped her when she was younger. Patricia enjoyed the moments when the whole school would come together. These were always energizing occasions filled with a special kind of happy conviviality. One such occasion was when we had to interview junior fellows. Once a year, we would bring in young scholars who competed for a few Mellon Foundation memberships. Her searching questions and the intensity of her engagement with whatever topic they studied were formidable. Months later, the select few in residence would often recall how stimulating as well as terrifying that experience had been. Many of them, I'm sure, got a lifetime's worth of research topics from Patricia's close interrogation. In our deliberations, Patricia was always fair and firm in her fairness. When she thought something was not quite right, she would not yield, and that principled judgment was a gentle reminder that our enterprise does carry a moral charge, one that we should not easily part with. She and I collaborated quite closely on one occasion in particular. Some of us will remember that. That was an event sponsored by the IAS Centennial Council, which consisted of a special viewing of the exhibition of the Dead Sea Scrolls in New York City at the Discovery Times Square Center on October 29, 2011. Exactly 4 years ago, almost. Everything went well until the event was over. It was an unseasonably cold and windy evening. It rained, it snowed, and everyone was caught unprepared by the frigid temperature. When we boarded a chartered bus to take us back to Princeton, I was sitting next to Patricia, and she was not feeling well. Not long after that incident, she was diagnosed with cancer. Those symptoms, making their ominous appearance on that very dark night, marked the beginning of the long, courageous fight that would follow. In her last years at the school, Patricia continued to be cheerful, engaged, provocative as ever, and never missed a meeting until she retired. She was always ready to share a joke. She remarked once, as only she would, how sad it would be for a scholar to die long after having been forgotten. I'll conclude my speech with a statement sent by Professor Emeritus Glenn Bowersock, and I quote, "I hugely regret that it is impossible for me to be present today, but I've gladly accepted the invitation of the school's executive officer to contribute a few words for the occasion. My first interaction with Patricia Crone came long before she was at the Institute, when I assessed anonymously the manuscript of her path-breaking book on Meccan trade. While urging its publication, I suggested that its polemical tone might be cut back. When the press sent her my letter, she divined that I had written it and expressed gratitude for my very positive evaluation, but she protested that the book didn't seem overly polemical to her. She had no obligation to protect scholars from their own stupidity." This was vintage Patricia. When Oleg Robbert proposed her for a professorship, I was thrilled, not least because she was attracted to the many links between classical antiquity and Islam. It is ironic that the last topic we discussed before her tragic illness was nothing less than angels. I miss her acerbic erudition, her laser-like eye in reading texts, and her generous hospitality. Quite simply, I miss her, and so do all of us. Thanks.
Well, my name is Michael Cook, and I come all the way from the university. Back in November of 2011, I got an unusual email from Patricia. She proposed that we should meet and go for a walk. Now, meeting, there was nothing unusual about that. We would meet from time to time, usually in one of the cafes that have sprung up in Princeton, sort of since Patricia came, and perhaps to an extent thanks to her patronage. And there we would talk shop and gossip. But this was the first time ever that she had proposed that we go for a walk. And I didn't have a good feeling about it. I anticipated bad news, and of course, I was right. 3 days later, we met. It must have been a late afternoon. We met outside Farston Library, and she took her cycle which she never ever locked. She took her cycle, and we went for what turned out to be a very short walk. We went only as far as just inside the gates that take you to Prospect House. And on the way, she told me, of course, about her diagnosis with lung cancer. And she said a couple of things that stick in my mind. One is how appreciative she was that the cancer had held off until she had her book, the book on the nativist prophets of Iran, off her desk. And the second was that she would be quite satisfied with another 5 years of working life. Now, the outcome, of course, the book came out next year, in 2012, but she didn't get those 5 years. She got 3 due to the brain tumor that developed as a sort of secondary stage of the cancer. But anyway, having said these things, she cycled off into the night. And I realized at that point that the reason why she had choreographed our meeting as a walk was so that as soon as she'd told me what she wanted to tell me, she could ride off without any unnecessary fuss. Whereas if we'd had still half a cup of tea to drink, there would have been what she would have regarded as unnecessary fuss. Yes, she didn't get those 5 years. I think, yes, she got just about 3. And I remember very well the last time I saw her when I really felt that she was herself. And that was when I saw her in hospital shortly after she had that fall late in 2014. After that, I began to miss her long before she actually died. And I'm sure everybody here also misses her in many different ways. But I have to confess that there's one way in which I'm rather relieved that she's not here right now at this particular occasion. Because just imagine how impatient she would have been. She would have itched to pull out a red pencil and strike out all the redundancies in the things that we say, the things that have been said already by another speaker. She would have been suffering, and not necessarily in silence, at the length of time it takes us to make our points. She would have been very, very impatient, very much wanting us to finish up, wrap it all up, so that we could all go home and do something serious, like research or gardening. So there is a kind of a silver lining to the fact that she's not here, despite the fact that I'm sure that many of the things that we say this afternoon are things that would have touched her and moved her, perhaps deeply. But the first thing I want to say now is not something that would have moved her, though she would certainly have assented to it. And that is that her impatience was something that went very deep in both her social and her academic life. She had a profound lack of tolerance for the standard hypocrisies of social and academic life. And this was something that had an obvious link to the fact that she could on occasion be a little tactless. And this impatience and this tactlessness, these were things that were not by any means entirely a liability. They were things that worked for her in very significant ways. I mean, some of you, I'm sure, know the story of how she became a fellow of Caius College, Cambridge. But for those who don't, let me tell it to you briefly. Sometime when Patricia was a lecturer in Cambridge, the fellows of Caius College decided that they had to bite the bullet and bring some women into their company. And this was, of course, very, very scary. It meant breaking with a tradition that went back to 1348. It was something that could have issued in disaster, and you don't want that kind of disaster to happen on your watch in a 600-year-old college. So they were very, very scared, but they bit the bullet and they started inviting some potential fellows, potential women fellows, to come to their high table dinners. And Patricia was duly invited. And as you can imagine, the ice was about as thick as it used to be in the Arctic Ocean before global warming set in. And to cover up some embarrassing moment of silence, Patricia picked up the glass of wine that was in front of her and took a sip. And without even thinking about the consequences, she remarked, "This wine is terrible." And Patricia actually had a very fine sense of taste, which she inherited from her father, who at one stage was a professional tobacco tester in a cigarette company in Denmark in the days when that was a respectable line of business. So she knew what she was talking about. And the Fellows of Keys then picked up their glasses and tested the wine. And sure enough, Patricia was absolutely right. So they summoned the waiters and had them take away the offending bottle and bring something drinkable. And from that moment onwards, they loved her. And she had a very happy relationship with her college. It ended in a sense when she came to this country. She could no longer be a fellow there. But she retained warm feelings about Keys right down to the end. And not so long ago, maybe a couple of years ago, the Fellows of Keys voted to make her an honorary fellow. But the impatience that was such an essential quality of Patricia's didn't just operate in this kind of social context, it also operated academically. It operated, of course, in tandem with various other qualities, which are very obvious. I won't say much about them. I mean, her commitment to logic and evidence, and her determination to think things through, and her powerful imagination, all that together. But put it this way, I know that the word discourse has many rival definitions, but my favorite one is that discourse is the noise that academics make when they have nothing to say. And Patricia had absolutely zero tolerance for discourse and a sub-zero ability to manufacture it. She had absolutely no patience with intellectual diplomacy and academic PR. Now, this meant that she could be very hard on her fellow academics. I remember vividly, shortly after she came to this country, and she wrote a scathing report for a publisher about a typescript that some young scholar had the misfortune to send to that publisher. And it so happened that I was the one who had to provide first aid for the victim of this scathing report. And I remember afterwards telling Patricia off, not for what she had said, but for how she said it. And I hope that after that she was perhaps marginally more gentle when she wrote scathing reports than she was on that particular occasion. But yeah, and also quite recently, just a few months ago, I heard a story from another colleague about how he gave Patricia a draft of an article to read, and Patricia wrote in the margins, "I don't know whether to laugh or cry." So she hadn't actually adjusted her tone very much. But I think what I have to say in her defense, if that were needed, would be that she was very even-handed. She was, in other words, as hard on herself as she was on other people. Patricia spent quite a few days of what in the language of Ignatius Loyola we could call days of desolation. There were times in Patricia's life when she felt that her scholarship was no good, that she was stuck in a tunnel, a research tunnel, with no sign of light at the other end of it, and even that she was no good at her job here at the Institute. And the fact of the matter was that she wasn't a natural fit for the job. She didn't bring to it any of the regal presence that her predecessor, Oleg Grabar, brought to it. And this was something that Patricia was painfully aware of. And it took her, I think, a while to find her feet in the role. But she definitely, very definitely did find her feet. And I think certainly, as far as I could observe from the outside, she performed her core, so to speak, the role that was given to her by the core mission of the Institute, namely identifying and nurturing young talent, I think she did that superbly. She was very proactive about it. She didn't just wait for young talent to apply to the Institute. She went out there looking for it. And once young scholars had, so to speak, survived Patricia's impatience, they were then richly rewarded. They were richly rewarded with an unflagging investment of time and energy in their research and in their careers. And it was, I think, something that went far beyond the call of institutional duty. It was very much part of the core mission of this institute, but she put a lot more into it than she needed to do. And that was something extremely good. And that, I think, is the living, breathing half of Patricia's legacy. The other half of her legacy is, of course, her scholarship. And here I wanted to take advantage of this occasion to give you a quick update on a major project that we have in hand. And that is a 3-volume collected articles, which Brill is going to bring out, we hope, this coming year. Now, 3 volumes of Patricia's articles is a tremendous editorial challenge. It's not just the fact that there's an awful lot of them there, 3 volumes worth. It's also the fact that any kind of necessary standardization involves a lot of work. But above all, it's the fact that Patricia, being Patricia, over the years, found out all sorts of things that she wished she had known when she first published such and such an article. She came up with innumerable additions and corrections. They were scribbled in the margins and then, with luck, sometimes transferred to other more legible forms. And all this has to be worked into the 3 volumes. And I'm happy to say that we have a splendid editor who is handling this, and that is Hanna Siurua. And I thought I would just end by saying a word about why we chose her. Now, of course, a lot of it was the fact that we knew that she was very good at editing. I knew that because she had worked on a Festschrift that I had been involved in a few years ago, and she had done a kind of last-minute cleanup of a Festschrift that was in editorial disarray. It was a remarkable piece of work, and that really stuck in my mind. But I think, for me at least, the clincher was not her track record as known to us, but rather something her husband said about her. Her husband is Ahmed al-Shamsi, who lectures in Islamic studies at Chicago, and who maybe a couple of years ago published his first book. And if you go to the preface of that book, you find acknowledgements in the usual way to many people. And one of them is his wife, Hanna. And he thanks her, and I quote, for her merciless but constructive criticisms. Now, merciless but constructive criticism was something Patricia was extremely good at. And I think Patricia would have loved the fact that her papers are now in the hands of somebody like that.
Good afternoon. I am Carmela Virchillo Franklin, a member of the Board of Trustees of the Institute for Advanced Study, but a trustee with a very particular charge. I serve as the academic trustee nominated by the School of Historical Studies to represent its interests to the Board of Trustees as a whole. It is in this capacity that I got to know Patricia Crone, who was the Andrew W. Mellon Professor in the School of Historical Studies. For me, it is a great honor to speak at this memorial for one of our most eminent members of the faculty of this school. Scholarly colleagues of Professor Crone today and at other times will reflect and have reflected on Professor Crone's enormous contributions to our field, contributions that challenged accepted paradigms to create a richer and more complex view of the formation of early Islamic political and religious traditions. I want to participate in that conversation by adding that Patricia Crone will be remembered also as a pioneering thinker who consolidated the position of Islamic studies at the School of Historical Studies here at the Institute, as others before me, of course, also have said. She was only the second scholar of Islam and its cultures to hold the professorship in the school, following Oleg Robbert, a renowned art historian who brought the study of Islam to the Institute for Advanced Study in 1990. Patricia certainly continued and expanded Professor Grabbar's scholarly legacy in creating a solid, permanent, strong place for the story of Islam here at the Institute. Patricia made it easy for me to explain why the School of Historical Study matters within the Institute and within the global scholarly community. Her absolute commitment to the highest scholarly standards, without concern for fads, fashion, or popularity, and we've heard about that already today. These are the values on which the Institute is based. The qualities of our scholarship that is deeply scientific, that deals with fundamental questions that may at first appear to be unrelated to current issues, and in her case, engages with original sources in a variety of difficult and literal studied languages. These have been the values at the center of the Institute for Advanced Studies since its founding. Yet, of course, it is such scholarship that is most relevant for every field, for it makes us understand the human experience, our past, and our current reality. I was reminded of this paradox just this past week when, taking a break from my own scholarly preoccupation perhaps, with the writing of papal history in the 11th century, I listened to a lecture given by Patricia Crone here at the Institute in 2009. And if you haven't heard it, please do listen to it because it's posted on the web. It is entitled, The Acculturated Native Who Rebels, Nativist, Nationalist, Western-born jihadists in Historical Perspective. Patricia begins the lecture by putting up on the screen the pictures of a few well-known modern-day jihadists, such as the London bombers, Omar Said Sheikh, for example. These pictures then are immediately juxtaposed, are followed by images of some of our most revered historical figures, whom we do not think of as belonging in the same category as English-born Muslims who committed what are called terrorist acts. Moses, for example, is pictured on the slides both as a young man in Egyptian garb and then as the aged prophet and lawgiver of the Jews. This provocative preface prepares us for a wide-ranging, yet extraordinary and detailed discussion on the controversial topic of her lecture. She makes us understand that what we think of as a modern phenomenon is in fact a deeply complex and historically rooted movement. It has been the custom for the faculty of the School of Historical Studies to meet with me before the deliberations of the Board of Trustees. We meet on Friday morning in preparation for the meeting of the full board, which takes place on Saturday morning. This will happen just this next week. This discussion has afforded me an opportunity to hear the news of the school, to be advised about the progress of important projects, for example, the recruitment of a new faculty member, the planning of a new conference, but we also discuss, I must confess, less exalted concerns. For example, the shortage of appropriate meeting space near the dining room. At these meetings, Patricia's uncompromised standards for the school and for the Institute as a whole were always in the forefront of any discussion. As in her scholarship, here too, she was not a follower of fads, of shortcuts, of compromise. She took it for granted, of course, that in hiring of new faculty or in the selection of the members, only scholarly excellence should be taken into consideration. But also she was quick to examine the degree to which any initiative under consideration, no matter how apparently insignificant, would relate to the central concern of maintaining the excellence of the school and of the institute. I recognize her attitude here very much in the comments of Professor Cook, who knew her so much better than I did. Yet her arguments and deeply held beliefs were always leavened by a great sense of humor and self-irony. There are many here today who knew Patricia better as a scholar, as a collaborator, as a mentor, as a family member, as a friend. I knew Patricia for too short a time, for I met her only when I began my term as trustee in 2011. I wish I could have known her longer, and hearing some of you talk about her makes that wish even stronger. I have heard from those who count her as a friend of her love, from those who counted her as a friend, of her love of fun, of her fantastic parties, of her skill in dancing, waltzes and polkas, of her gardening. These are things I also love, particularly the dancing. I had a glimpse of her graciousness, of her friendliness, of her amusement at life's adventures, even small ones, when, by sheer chance, we happened to be in the same nondescript restaurant in Ithaca, New York, a couple of summers ago. She spotted me. I had not seen her, and came up to say hello, big smile on her face. I was with my husband driving down to New York City from Buffalo, and we had detoured to visit Cornell. She had never met him. She was with her sister. We were both amused to find each other in another habitat. I thought of her only as part of the Institute community, a scholar whose work took her to exotic places. And in a parallel way, she was also wondering what I was doing there in upstate New York. But we were both happy to see each other in a different, unexpected place. We had a brief conversation to explain how we happened to be there. She had family in the area. She said the restaurant was pretty good, despite appearances. I revealed that I had another life in upstate New York as the wife of a bishop in the Episcopal Church. I can still see the amused twinkle in her blue eyes in learning about this very singular aspect of my life. I am profoundly grateful to have known Patricia, a privilege which I owe to this place, which brought us together. The Institute, where she lived, she worked, a place that can claim to have been significant to her and to which she contributed in so many ways, a place where a legacy will not be forgotten. Thank you.
My name is Gannagé. I'm professor at Georgetown University, and I have been a member at the Institute in 2006-2007 in the cohort of Patricia's members. So I guess it is in that capacity that I'm here. So I never thought that one day I would be participating in a remembrance event for Patricia, nor that this day would come so fast. When I started collecting my thoughts to jot some notes on paper, the memories resurfaced, mixed up, from the very first day we met in 2003 until the last time I saw her a month or so before she left us. Then I thought I would pull up some emails to try to get the details of such or such event. And that was the thing not to do. I was suddenly overwhelmed by tons of emails. In a second, all the emails, from the most formal to the most personal, started unfolding in an implacable chronological order, unfurling the so many aspects of our relationship. The mentor providing guidelines to all the members on how to conduct our seminars, and I quote, "The presentations must always involve a text or a dossier of texts. Silences are also important to let us think," end of quote. The friend sharing the recipe of the amazing filet in bed that was the high point of the dinners around the table at Humbert Street, and which was truly cooked in bed under several layers of blankets. The colleague sharing the final draft of an article on which she genuinely expected you to comment. The parties against at Humbert, the Quran reading group, the countless meetings over lunch or tea at the Institute, and so on and so forth. All aspects of Patricia's lives were so much intertwined, and all of them revolved around her passionate dedication to her research. It's almost impossible to isolate one of them without calling upon the others. Otherwise, the picture would remain incomplete, if not distorted. Even though Patricia hated consensus, there is today an almost unanimous consensus, shared even by her harshest critiques, as to the great impact her outstanding scholarship had on the field of Islamic history, and maybe best summarized by Fred Donner when he told the New York Times, "Her death deprives our field of someone who was at one and the same time its main motor and, in a way, its conscience," end of quote. It's thus other aspect of her personality that I would like to highlight and share with you tonight. We first met here at the Institute in 2003 when Patricia organized one of the most extraordinary conferences I ever participated in on the Greek strand in Islamic political thought. At that time, she was finishing God's Rule Government in Islam, a comprehensive, brilliant, and at times bold reconstruction and analysis of Islamic political thought and its development during the first 6 centuries of Islam. The objective of the conference was to trace the development of this Greek strand from late antiquity into medieval times, to evaluate how far it affected Islamic thought and discuss its impact on neighboring societies. So the gathering included 25 classicists, Syriacists, Islamicists, Byzantinists, and European medievalists from all over the world and lasted for no less than 2 weeks. Presentations of long papers distributed ahead of time to all the participants alternated with the reading of text. The format of the conference allowed for very thorough discussions in and outside the sessions, and Patricia made sure, with the ruthless authority she knew how to exercise when need be, that nobody would read. It was and remained a unique event in its breadth and depth, and I think that no conference of this scale will ever again be organized in the field. It could certainly not have happened without the unique environment and the resources provided by the Institute. For someone like me, who had always worked and studied in large cities, I found it hallucinating to be able to go to the library at 2 a.m. in the morning in order to check a reference, and found that I was not the only one. So this being said, like most of the conferences she organized, Patricia had no intention of publishing any proceedings. Too much and energy time-consuming, and especially too distracting from the real work. At that time, I was teaching at St. Joseph University in Beirut, and had just been appointed editor of the once prestigious Mélange de l'Université Saint-Joseph, one of the oldest periodicals in Oriental studies, and the core achievement of this institution that had waned progressively during the Civil War, as several of the great Jesuit scholars closely associated with it sadly died or were killed. I was 35 and faced with the titanic task of relaunching this venerable and almost centennial journal. During the conference, I realized that with such an amazing array of presentation, if I could convince Patricia, whom I didn't know at that time, first to accept to publish the proceedings, and second to entrust me with the publication in the Mélange, I would have won a battle. Contrary to the expectation of many who knew how uncompromising she could be, Patricia was easily convinced, and our collaboration produced a beautiful issue of more than 600 pages, including a bibliography of 40 pages, and immediately became, until this very day, the reference in Greco-Arabic political philosophy. I must admit I worked very hard and even tortured our graphic designer, but the final outcome ravaged Patricia, and she took it upon herself to contact the libraries she knew to suggest to them to renew their subscription to the Mélange. For the Mélange, it was a turning point, and that issue got us back on track. From there on, the issues unfolded on one after the other, fatty and diverse, and she even contributed to a later issue, a beautiful article on the Dahriz according to Al-Jahiz. The articles she published in the Mélange will be reprinted according to her will in the forthcoming 3 volumes Michael told you about. This was Patricia, unassuming, generous, enthusiastic, and incredibly supportive when it comes to boosting the career of junior scholars. Now, as a scholar and as a mentor, Patricia was first and foremost a real scholar in the full sense of the term. And even if it seems rather a banality to say, especially after everything which has been said just before me, it's important to emphasize it because that entails an ethic that she fully embodied. She never wrote to please her peers and was never tempted by the consensual still waters of a certain academia. The awards and honors came late in her life, and even if she did not shun them, she did not run after them. She wrote because she had real questions to raise and explore, even if that entailed many a time swimming against the current, which she liked to do. She could get wrong because she was a real researcher who never avoided any question. As a scholar, Patricia was first an outstanding historian, and this is also important to remember, because, in my opinion, this is precisely where her great input to the field of Islamic studies lied. To have applied to it the rigorous methodology of a discipline, which in that case entailed first and foremost questioning your sources. Her intellectual honesty was dauntless, and even if sometimes she expressed it in an intimidating or harsh way, it was always inspiring. I remember once, while reviewing one of her articles, to have drawn her attention to a formulation that could lend itself to misinterpretation, and that gave room to a long, brilliant, and illuminating footnote. Her relentless intellectual curiosity explains also the genuine interest she would take in the fresh mind of young scholars, and her way of never dismissing any opinion or any source, even if it were a Google search. Now, I would like to close on a more personal note concerning first the sisters. From the outside, Patricia and from the outside, there was apparently not so many things in common between Patricia and yet we shared a similar upbringing. Patricia and I had sisters, not 1, not 2, but 3 for her and 4 for me. We both came from a family of 5 siblings with strong and very different characters, and that explains many features of her personality. When you make it through 4 siblings and so many sisters, you are a survivor, and hence a fearless soldier. You are used to never complain because they will make fun of you, and you know how to fight because you needed to constantly defend your territory. But also, you have the unique privilege of the best support team ever if need be. And they were there when Patricia needed them, especially Diana, who not only provided a wonderful support that enabled Patricia to remain in her home until the end, but was able to transform part of this terrible grace period into a great adventure. It needs 2 sisters to turn a fight against cancer into a rodeo across America in praise of marijuana. And to finish, I mean, I cannot finish without mentioning the bicycle. Patricia's bicycle was notorious, or rather, Patricia riding her bicycle under any climatic condition or any circumstances, be it a cold, snowy, or rainy winter evening, or a fantastic spring day. Everybody knew it. It was her favorite mode of transportation, and she would very rarely give it up. A few years ago, when she was already starting to feel tired, we were both leaving the institute after an event which ended a little bit late, and it was already dark outside. I offered to drive her home and got the expected answer with the expected indignant tone, "No, I have my bicycle." But this time, I was determined not to yield, and we argued a little bit before I finally intimated, "Patricia, this bicycle goes in the trunk. You go in the front, and we go home now." And to my great surprise, she yielded. Instead of rejoicing, I was totally dismayed and almost unhappy. Patricia surrendered when she never did. That night, I knew that we had reached a turning point. Indeed, things would never be as before again, but we still had many good moments and so many laughters, and I remain grateful for the gift of the unexpected long stretch after the initial diagnosis. To say that I miss her very much is an understatement.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Judith Herrin from London, and it is my great pleasure to come to this memorial service, however sad. Diana has asked me to talk about the things about Patricia that surprised me. And this is quite difficult, but it is correct that there were certain features of Patricia that were extraordinary. I wrote quite a lot about our long relationship in the Festschrift that has been mentioned, so I don't want to repeat all that. And indeed, the account is now online at opendemocracy.net, where Patricia wrote one of her very interesting articles about what we actually know about the Prophet Muhammad. But I think, going over this subject, it was Patricia herself who was the great surprise. Those eyes, they have indeed been mentioned already. The way they claim attention, they have a curious intellectual approach, they insist, they demand, and they convey a very strong personality. Her clear, bright focus, that determined look. It was a genuine pleasure to be introduced to the famous Dr. Crone at the Warburg Institute when the director announced that I was to share her office. Now, he may have thought, these two ladies don't work in the same field, I don't know whether they're going to get on, but we did. From the very beginning, in 1977, when I first met her in London. And I witnessed there the features that I began to associate particularly with Patricia. Her dedication to scholarship, her attention to detail, her determination to find out how this text, this particular source, this tiny detail, related to a much bigger picture, because she was already embracing a very ambitious role in understanding the history of early Islam. Now, my field is that of late antique and Byzantine studies. So I came from a completely different corner of the Near East, from a different tradition, basically in Greek and Latin. And we found we had many things in common, and we could bring these together and cooperate in ways that were very basic to our friendship. Already at the Warburg Institute, we had a seminar in which Patricia gave a paper on the roots of iconoclasm? Did they go back to a Judaic and Islamic tradition? And we continued to cooperate through many shared interests throughout our long relationship. It goes back nearly 40 years. I think it was this capacity to relate the minute detail that she had drawn out of a very obscure source to a much larger picture, to its setting within the world of the Near East, that made her such an exceptional historian. But the other great feature that I immediately realized was her extraordinary love of life. Her curiosity about distant places, her adventurous demand that we should travel to different places, visit ancient cities, understand ancient civilizations. Her commitment to the good life in eating, in her pleasure in the kitchen, not only the wine tasting, but in wonderful meals that she cooked, and in the social activity of sitting around the table together, which always brought out the best conversations. I was also very struck by her elegance and her forthright character. In many ways, she was the model of a very feminine intellectual. And I think she had realized in the late 60s and 70s, through the movement of women's liberation, a character and a status and a standing that were quite exceptional. She was no feminist, but she had a great understanding of the importance of equality, gender issues, and although she was never raucous or rude in her claims, I think she had a very stern way of expressing her authority, which has been much, has already been referred to. I recall how even in her late on in her illness, she would prepare herself for yet another visit to the hospital, for yet another medical test, all the things that she had to go through. And I was amazed to see her dressed to the nines, off to Sloane Kettering, as if it was a trip to the opera. Now, of course, we always dressed up for the opera and for her parties, and she had a wonderful sense of occasion and wore most elegant and attractive clothes. But I would say she was always striking, but not showy. And finally, she had a great love of her garden and that wonderful house on Humboldt Street, in which she created a fine garden. I note that it was at some distance from the Institute. Many professors at the Institute prefer to live on Oldham Lane or in the environs. Not Patricia. She chose a house in the city close to Firestone Library, and of course with her bicycle she could always come and go. But she put a little distance between herself and the Institute, and she established herself in this beautiful house, which she furnished in a very stylish fashion, so that she could devote herself to this double garden. And there she chose the bulbs that she planted in the autumn, so that in the spring she would have different colors, particular types of tulip, next to the particular grape hyacinth and the beautiful daffodils. She replanted trees so that she would have a real dogwood that would flower in the spring with the colored blossoms that she liked. And how she loved her roses. Toward the end of her life, she was still ordering lots of new plants that she wanted to put in her garden and in her neighbor's garden. And there she selected fragrances, particular fragrances of roses, as well as colors and different varieties, those that bloom in great bursts with many buds and those that come as single stems. And she put this garden together with such love. And I remember how she hated the machines that gardeners used to hoover up the leaves in the fall. She would go out with a rake and rake them together. And that garden was a great achievement and gave her, I think, great pleasure. Roses, of course, flourish in Princeton in that very, very short period of spring. 2 weeks maximum. But for those 2 weeks, she was in an exalted state of delight at her garden and the colors and the fragrances of her roses. And that is how I will remember her. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Carol Bakhos of the University of California, Los Angeles. I first met Patricia through her work while I was finishing up my dissertation in the late 90s and became more acquainted with her as my dabbling in Islamic studies developed into a more serious endeavor. Former students and colleagues in the field spoke of her in legendary terms. After all, this was the feisty, fearless scholar, along with Michael Cook, who created a paradigm shift in the landscape of Islamic history. This was the woman who questioned and overturned and uprooted many fundamental suppositions about Islam's formative period. Needless to say, I was eager to meet this force of nature. Well, to be honest, I was also rather apprehensive. After all, while it is true that all her students are forever indebted to her for giving their papers such attention, it was well known that getting feedback from her was a traumatic experience for the faint of heart, and frankly, even for the less faint of heart. Yikes! Even her colleagues talked about the slash and burn of her red pencil. So who was this woman who instilled fear and at the same time tremendous admiration and affection in the hearts of those who learned with her? Note, I did not say that students sat at her feet. No one sat at Patricia's feet. You learned along with her, as I would discover in 2006 when I came here for a year to study with her and Michael. The Patricia I came to know and love dearly did not quite live up to the legend. For one thing, I came out of the experience of studying with her unscathed, perhaps because we often started our study sessions with at least one gin and tonic and ended them with another 1 or 2 or 3. By the way, Patricia once accused me of overestimating just how much we drank, but I assure you, whatever the case may be, she made a very strong drink. Reading Quranic exegetical passages, tafsir, with her on a regular basis made me appreciate just how rare a scholar she was. This was someone who took no shortcuts, who was relentless and exceedingly self-possessed, for whom what mattered most was getting to the heart of the matter, finding the truth with a capital T, even if it meant she stood corrected. Her reputation, or how many books she wrote or accolades she amassed, was of relatively little consequence. For her, the production of good scholarship was one thing, pretension and self-aggrandizement another, vanity of vanities. When I think of Patricia, I am reminded of a verse from John Donne's Satire 3. On a huge hill, cragged and steep, truth stands, and he that will reach her about must go. And she, Patricia, about must, and about must went. Nothing could keep her away from her work, well, except a visit from the only person whose estimation of her work truly mattered, from the person whom she loved and respected more than anyone else. Michael. Perhaps I shouldn't exaggerate. She deplored purple prose and hyperbole. No, not exaggeration about how much she valued Michael, but about not being tempted away from work. After all, this was a deeply passionate, vibrant woman who brimmed with life. That's what I found most inspiring about Patricia. She embodied what it means to be a strong yet sensual woman in academia. She knew how to let her hair down, and what fun it was when she would, as she would say, make mischief together. While scholarly pursuits brought us into the same orbit, our relationship went far beyond academic confines. Patricia was not my mentor. She was my friend, my confidant, someone with whom I enjoyed endless hours of conversation, ranging from the state of Quranic studies to our colleagues. Yes, we gossiped. We gossiped a lot. To matters that can't be shared in company. In mixed company. Well, maybe in any company for that matter. It wasn't always easy being her friend. Patricia was demanding and exceedingly hard to please. I remember once she asked me to pick up a loaf of bread from the bakery, from her favorite local bakery. You think a loaf of bread, how difficult could this be? But I knew I was in trouble. Well, after 2 trips to the bakery, 2 rejected loaves of bread, on the 3rd try, and I did insist on the 3rd try, I was determined to please her, I brought back all the remaining options, and she rejected all of them. She took a piece, and I didn't know she had such great taste also in wine, I guess. She took a piece of each and said, no. Not good. How could I not forgive her? And I must confess, on a few occasions, I did suffer the slings and arrows of her unrestrained tongue, though no doubt she was oblivious to its effects. Take, for example, the one time, the only time probably that you're allowed to tell a white lie, when hyperbole is most appropriate. That is when you talk about how a bride looks on her wedding day. Well, true to form, on my wedding day, when this middle-aged bride needed, perhaps even craved reassurance about her middle-aged looks, Patricia turned to me and said bluntly, "You look fine." What bride looks fine on her wedding day? It's no surprise that this fearless scholar was also an extraordinarily courageous woman. In March of 2012, I drove Patricia to Basking Ridge, New Jersey to have radiation treatment. Despite her acknowledged fear of what awaited her, she was able to laugh easily, even at herself. One would have assumed we were heading off to the movies or to make mischief. But that wasn't Patricia pretending as if all was well. It was Patricia being brave. Even as she physically deteriorated, this was no delicate woman. We made 2 attempts to head to Syria. We even had flights and hotels booked. But the first time, cancer waged war on her body, and then Syria erupted in civil war. We did, however, take other trips, not as exotic as Damascus, and Aleppo, or Istanbul, which we were also planning to do, but trips no less as enjoyable and life-affirming as any trip can be. We went to Alpine, New York, to spend time with Diana and Jeff, who since then have become treasured friends. One of the most generous gifts she gave me was bringing them into my life. Patricia had many loves, but her two greatest were research and gardening. In many ways, two sides of the same coin. In her library and backyard, she toiled and labored to her heart's content. She uprooted weeds, she planted seeds, and grew flowers. Patricia shaped landscapes. She cultivated both gardens with single-mindedness, passion, and joy. I hope that at the end of her day, she looked at all that she had done and said, "Ah, now that is very good."
Hello. I am one of Patricia's nephews. My name is Thomas Frank. As I was on the way here, of course, on the plane ride, I couldn't help but read the papers and see that there was a Hurricane Patricia hitting the coast, and my reaction was actually alarm. It felt like a bad omen that maybe we were displeasing her in some manner. But then I came to my senses and I thought, well, even if we were doing that, she wouldn't be taking it out on Mexico. And furthermore, this just wasn't the way she operated. She wouldn't have countenanced superstition in us. In fact, she would have laughed at that. In a good way, and I'll get back to that laughter. So yes, so I felt it had to be mentioned, if only to dismiss it as since hurricanes are unwelcome and destructive and deadly, and Patricia was none of these things. Although I suppose she could. I'll conserve this much of the metaphor. There was the storm and there was the eye, and there was both stormy and calm Patricia, and I was very fond of both. And the stormy Patricia, I'll start with. There was the not always tactful stormy Patricia, and I remember the first time my wife met her, and that was when Patricia had recently moved to Princeton. She was delighted with being in Princeton on the whole, and certainly came to be more and more delighted with it and with her house. But she had just arrived in Princeton at this time, and we politely made conversation at the dinner table asking what she thought of it. And she said, "It's noisy. You know, all day you hear cars and planes, and then you think, oh, the weekends it's going to relax. But then you hear people start up with their lawnmowers and my wife thought, I like this woman." She did. I hasten to add, become very happy here in Princeton, despite the lawnmowers, and I guess that explains the raking of the leaves that we later saw. But that stormy side of her, I knew best from my childhood summers in Denmark, when all of the 5 siblings would come in and out of my grandmother's house on visits, and I would be there too. And Patricia blowing in was such a beam of energy, and it was such a welcome kind of energy. It wasn't a restless energy. In fact, she usually slept until about noon, and it wasn't antsy energy. It was just exuberant energy, sort of, let's have a gin and tonic. And at the dinner table, her voice was always the loudest and most exuberant and most adamant, but it wasn't unpleasant. You could say something and she would dissolve in great laughter. And that laughter, if you knew Patricia, you knew it well. And it was a very special kind of laughter that I've been thinking about. It was always a sincere laughter. It was never a polite laughter. And it was never a dismissive or scornful laughter. but always a very supportive laughter. It was on your side. It was a laughter that was paying attention to you, was very attentive and finding you very interesting and being amused by what you were saying, and a laughter that enjoyed life. And if you made a joke, you were often rewarded with it if it was a good one. And it was like being in front of a very pleasant mirror that made you look a bit better than you are. And so I would say it was probably the most flattering laughter I'd ever known. And as a child, I really relished being rewarded with it. And of course, it also became a laughter that she used to cope with bereavement and with her illness, and it was a very stoic laughter. And I don't think many of us could manage to laugh through appointments with an oncologist, but Patricia, assisted by jokes from my mother, could do so. And so all of those things were the stormy side, and the calm side was, of course, that thoughtful Patricia who could home in on a book for hours and could read, but also the night owl, and I was a night owl, and in Denmark those summers when I was 10, 11, 12, and everyone in the house would have gone to bed, I would still be up, and Patricia would still be up too, and we would both be there, and we would always wind up talking, and she would make us tea, and we would chat, and again she would pay such close attention to me as I spoke, and she would laugh, and they were such nice evenings. And sometimes we would simply turn on the television. There wasn't a lot to watch because Danish television at that time had about one channel and it ended at midnight, but we would catch the end, and sometimes it would just be something like a silly French film, and Le Voyou was one of them, I happen to remember. It's pretty good, check it out, it holds up. And we both enjoyed that. But one other thing, and I don't know why this moment has kept coming back to me, but it has. We happened to watch a documentary on of all things, the French cellist Paul Tortelier, and it was only the last 15 minutes of the show, and so when it ended, I think we were both a little sad that it was over, and the closing credits were sad because it noted that this was a documentary about a person recently deceased, and Tortelier was this very funny and engaging and full of life man, and Patricia simply said when the program was over in Danish, "Hvor var han dejlig," which means how lovely he was. And because that moment stays with me, I think I will just close on that and simply change the pronoun and say, "Hvor var hun dejlig," how lovely she was.
Hi, I'm Diana Frank. I'm Patricia's sister, and not her twin, as some people think. I look over here, and I think virtually all of you, if not all of you, knew Patricia. And if you knew Patricia, you know that when she said something, she meant it. In her instructions to me after her death, she asked to be cremated with minimal fuss. And of course, I followed her instructions, and boy, did she get her wish. The fuss was so minimal as to be disconcerting. The last time I saw Patricia the way I would think of Patricia was a few moments before the emissaries from the funeral home put her in a body bag and took her away. The next time was when she landed on my doorstep in a cardboard box that contained 10 death certificates and a tasteful box of her ashes. I haven't quite yet sorted out what that kind of efficient minimalism has meant to me, but I certainly do know that that was not the way to end or to mark the end of a life or a relationship. So you can probably imagine how grateful I am to the Institute for hosting this remembrance. And so I want to thank Robbert Dijkgraaf, where are you, for making this possible and for taking the initiative and doing it in a way that would have pleased Patricia, in spite of what Michael says. I think she would have loved to see all of you here, and she was not above loving to hear praised. Who is? So she would have been very happy. I also want to thank Marian Zelazny and her entire crew for undertaking this huge job of organizing this thing. And then there are, of course, the people who helped Patricia. There was Kim, who shopped for her for years, and when I was nervous of what was going on at Humbert Street, or not going on at Humbert Street, I would call Kim and say, can you run over there? And Kim would run over there and see what the situation was and call me back and calm me down, which was an invaluable help to me. Thank you so much. And then there is Maria Tuya sitting there. I don't know what to say about Maria or what she did, because she did everything. Everything. She went above and beyond, and then above and beyond the above and beyond. There is no way to describe her dedication. It is unmatched. Thank you. And then, of course, in Sabine Schmidtke, Patricia got not only a successor, but a truly devoted friend. Sabine went to almost ridiculous lengths, but much appreciated lengths, to keep Patricia happy and engaged. I'm sure you all know about Sabine's extraordinary kindness, so I'll just give you one example of her craziness, and that was her Eierdienst. When Patricia's breakfast consisted of 2 soft-boiled eggs that she loved. Then when she went to rehab at Merwig after her big seizure last Christmas, she got hard-boiled eggs, and they were cold. And of course, you can imagine Patricia's comments on that situation. And so what does Sabine do? She boils eggs at home, wraps them up, and with the speed of an ambulance, takes them to Patricia, who then enjoys her 2 soft-boiled, nice, warm eggs. Sabine, you are crazy, but you are crazy in the most welcome and admirable way. Thank you. All of you made my life so much easier and so much better. And you made Patricia's life too much more enjoyable. And there are many, many other people I need to thank, both during her illness and after her death. There were people from near and far who sent her gifts of licorice, of flowers, of candy, who wrote her letters, cards, emails, telephoned, people who came to see her, people who sat at her bedside for hours, even on the days when she could barely speak. Her colleagues behaved like family to her. And in many ways, I think she considered you family. Certainly, family can at least partially be defined as people you feel comfortable with. You are and were her family, and the Institute in many ways was her home. She really enjoyed this environment. And many of you very kindly wrote to me and I've heard the same thing here this evening, this afternoon. You wrote to me about her brilliance and her honesty, and your mention of her brilliance and honesty did not surprise me at all. But you also wrote about her kindness, her patience, her generosity with her time and her advice. And I got to admit, in the beginning, I was actually a little bit surprised because she hardly ever showed those traits in her real family, so to speak, to her siblings. And when I actually teased Patricia about it, I said, well, you're nicer to your colleagues than you are to your family members. And she just didn't deny it, but laughed. So, but we were close in other ways, her siblings and her. And every year we would get together in Denmark for a reunion. And even this year, we managed to get together for a reunion, but in upstate New York at our house there, where you ran into us. And Patricia was quite sick at the time, and she arrived by special medical transport. And in spite of the fact that she could lie down all the way and did sleep most of the way, it was a rough trip for her. And of course, having arranged the whole thing, I felt responsible and a little bit guilty perhaps. And so I asked her, how she felt. Yes, she was tired. And so I said, oh, have you regretted doing it? And she said, no, not at all. And I said, oh, good, because here we are, all the 5 of us. Isn't that amazing? And she said, yes, it's like a fairy tale. I'm very sorry that my siblings can't be here today, but my youngest sister, Clarissa, agreed to put a little video together that shows Patricia a little bit like we saw her as siblings. And Clarissa was very nice to do her commentary in English. And so I think that no further explanation is necessary. And I think somebody's up there is ready with that little video. Thank you.
It all started quite ordinarily. Our mother met our father. They got married. They had one child, then another, then one more, then another one, and with some delay the final one. They all fitted in nicely into this world, and Patricia was surrounded by loving sisters and a brother. And they all did what you're expected to do as fortunate children: play, laugh, and accept the world as it is. But at a very early age, Patricia showed signs of being skeptical and wanting to dig deeper into things than most people do. But despite that, she had a carefree childhood and some teenage years. But when she reached high school, she could not withstand her questioning and critical tendency any longer. The teachers were boring. In fact, they were practically all old fools. Of course, especially the history teacher, who didn't have a clue. And after having discovered that the University of Copenhagen couldn't quite deliver what she wanted, she took off to London, and that's when Patricia started a life which became somewhat more extraordinary than that of her siblings, who followed the more usual path of marriage, studies, children, and jobs. When Patricia's first nephews were born, she was writing her thesis at SOAS. And when the next nephew arrived, she was on her way to Oxford. When Patricia wrote Hagarism, we were busy tying our children's shoes. And around the time when her first nieces were born, and we were busy changing diapers, she was busy writing Meccan Trade and the Rise of Islam. And when another niece and nephew arrived, and we were somewhat exhausted and still changing diapers, she was an energetic professor in Cambridge, writing still more books. And after Patricia moved to Princeton and became increasingly respected, we just started to have grandchildren and get even more tired. So Patricia ended up having quite a large biological family, which she enjoyed, especially in small doses. But Patricia's family was in many ways all of you here and other scholars around the world, and she thrived amongst you, and you must be a pretty energizing bunch because she didn't get tired. And she even had the energy to do puppet theater for other children, and she kept doing her wonderful garden and, of course, writing still more books. But Patricia was never stuck up, and with us she was just good old Patricia, laughing, grumpy, fun, sometimes a little difficult. And you probably would be surprised if you had overheard the giggling, the completely unscholarly and unserious things that we did together. So we will truly miss laughing with our extraordinary sister.
Am I happy I've got the volume to work? That's absolutely amazing. A warm word of thanks for everybody who spoke today, and you conjured up such a wonderful image of Patricia. And I think the Institute is forever grateful that we could be part of that family. And often I say the Institute is one of the few places where really it's about individuals. However, it's not, because it's about more. I think we all, whether it's in life or a scholarship, we are just links in a longer chain. And I felt that actually we kind of bonded the chains more this afternoon. And I just want all of you to know that we will do everything we can here at the Institute to prolong that chain and take good care of it. Also feel there were a lot of mentions of gin tonics. And so I feel in the spirit of Patricia, and it's such a wonderful day also, I want to invite you all to walk over to our dining hall and raise a glass and have something to eat in her honor. Thank you so much for being here this afternoon.